just to outline briefly what we'll be doing over the next hour or less, if we can get in a little quicker than that, we will. I'm just going to briefly set the scene before I hand over to Elaine and Emma, and they'll be giving a short presentation on the new capital delivery teams being established in each of your local authorities. We're grateful then to Sean McKeown from Kilkenny County Council, who's going to set out his approach and what they've been doing down there, which might bring the idea to life a little bit for some people. And thanks again, Sean, for agreeing to help us out today. We'll have a bit of room then for a Q&A at that stage. And then Fintan O'Brien, Rural Division ASEC, will say a few words, just with a focus on how we might approach 2024 delivery of our programmes and schemes as these capital delivery teams are being set up, which as we know, will take time. So look, why are we here? The big challenge, obviously, is the huge growth in rural funding, which is great news for rural Ireland, obviously, but not without its challenges. And the more funding we manage to get in this department to give out, the more we're asking you, the local authorities, to work with us to move that funding around, distribute it to the groups and organisations and communities across the country. So we certainly recognise, and indeed you guys recognise, the challenges in delivering all that in a timely way and delivering meaningful projects, at appropriate costs. So look, in recognition of that, I suppose, from the local authority side, the RCCH, one of the subcommittees of the CCMA, wrote to us late last year, setting out those challenges. Of course, the key concern for everybody being resources. So we in the department managed to secure a decent pot of money to help with that and provide funding for staff in each local authority to form these capital delivery teams, CDTs. So today we want to see set out how we see it working, the amount of funding available, the governance framework that we're going to establish to make sure we get the best out of the new arrangements. So look, we want to continue to ensure that we collaborate closely with you on this and with the teams when they're established. And when the teams are open and working internally, we want to make sure that all the other DRCD funded posts, town centre first officers, broadband officers and so on, are working together and begin to collaborate for the greater good. So the big idea, I guess, is this strive for a consistent, efficient approach to delivery of these schemes and programmes for the benefit of all the rural communities that we serve across the board. And this development, I think, is going to be a key driver of this ambition. So look, just before I hand over to Elaine, is kind of going to go through the nuts and bolts of it, and Emma, who will go through a little bit of the governance side. I want to thank the RCCH subgroup who developed the thinking around this initiative, particularly John Mulholland, who headed it up, who has recently retired. So look, I'm going to hand you over now to Elaine, who'll start going through some of the detail with you, and then they'll pass on to Sean. We'll have a bit of Q&A then, and we'll close off with Fintan. And listen, the questions and answers don't stop today. We'll give you our details at the end, and we're available to deal with any queries as they come up. So I'll let you go, Elaine.
Thanks, Paul. So just to introduce myself, my name's Elaine Jennings. Myself and my colleague Emma Dignan are working on a team that was set up specifically to look at some of the challenges around delivering capital projects sort of in the round and through fresh eyes. So I'll just run through very quickly some of the challenges that this initiative is intended to address. And the first one, this is actually a very useful diagram that came to us in a report that was put together by the CCMA and shared with us last November. So the sort of background to all of this, the background fact to all of this is the substantial level of increase in the rural capital funding that's being made available to local authorities. So rural funding has grown from 77 million in 2017 to 210 million now. That is, it's not quite triple, but it's very close to triple. So that's, I suppose, an important thing that we needed to bear in mind when we were looking to address these challenges. So as well as that, as well as substantial growth in rural capital funding, in the conversations we had internally with other colleagues in DRCD, through the CCMA report that we looked at in detail, and then through the conversations with that working group of the RCCH that Paul mentioned, there were a number of other things that came up. And one thing that was fairly clear was that the existing model for providing funding for local authority staff resources was that it was no longer quite fit for purpose. And that existing model is the model whereby local authorities could take 5% or 10% extra on top of their grant funding amount to go towards overheads and staffing and so on. But that funding it's uncertain. The local authority doesn't know that they're going to get it until they know about the success of the applications. So that has a workforce planning implication in that local authority can't quite see down the road and recruit dedicated staff and so on. So it's led to a bit of a patchy situation in terms of the staffing who are looking after our department's capital projects. So another issue then that kind of ties into that is the sort of applications that were coming in. The cost and the timeline estimates could sometimes be a bit prone to project optimism, simply because some of the staff just don't have the experience maybe of delivering capital projects that one would like to be able to get accurate estimates of costs and of the timelines involved. And as well as that, something that came up when speaking to our colleagues internally in DRCD was just a few little inconsistencies in terms of communication with local authorities on projects. Sometimes it's hard to know who was the best person to talk to find out about a given project. And sometimes it's hard to get kind of that single version of the truth on the progress of a project, just because the nature of that fragmented sort of staffing situation meant not everyone was up to date all the time on the status of a project, for example. So it could be hard to just get information that was up to date. So when we looked at these issues, it sort of became clear that staffing was a really fundamental one that underpinned a lot of the other issues and a lot of the other challenges that were arising in delivering projects on time and on budget. So that's why we've determined that the staffing is the issue that needs to be addressed first and foremost, and that putting in extra capacity in local authorities to deliver our projects will, we hope, mitigate a lot of the other projects almost automatically. So what we're looking to develop this initiative, it's called the Rural Capital Delivery Teams. And in essence, what it is, it's a pot of funding of up to €260,000 per year for each of the 28 rural local authorities. That's all of them bar the city councils. And that funding is for dedicated staff resources to work on DRCD funded capital projects. So we were speaking to that working group in the RCCH. It became very clear that there wasn't a one size fits all solution that we could roll out to all 28 local authorities. So what we're proposing is something that can be tailored to each local authority's particular needs. You know, it's up to each local authority in this model to identify the gaps that are preventing them from developing solid applications and from delivering things in kind of the timeframes and in the budgets that they would prefer. So we are inviting proposals from the relevant local authorities for what they would like to do with this pot of money, which will be complemented by their own resources as well. We're inviting proposals. We'll review the proposals and come to an agreement on how this money is to be used. And what we envisage is that it will be used to fund approximately 3 staff in each local authority. I say approximately because obviously it depends on the grade and so on. But the key thing is that we're not being prescriptive. You know, it's up to each local authority to decide, do they really need community engagement staff? Do they really need engineers and more technical staff? They all have different structures and different needs. So it's open to each local authority to decide what the need is. And we're using the word teams because we do want these staff to work together and bring a bit of joined up thinking to delivering our projects. But they don't all have to be in the same unit. They don't all have to be in the same directorate. It can fit in with your local authority's structures. So that's key. It's bespoke to each local authority. I mentioned earlier the overhead model, the 5 or 10% on top of the grant amount that local authorities can claim. This funding for capital delivery teams will replace that to some extent, to the extent that it was used for staffing. But I just want to be clear that in some cases, we know the overheads are still necessary and they'll still be provided under different schemes for things like, say, getting in external professionals to do environmental assessments and those types of bits of work. So they're not going away. I just want to provide assurance on that.
Good.
And we have made the maximum commitment that we could We've made a 5-year commitment to provide this funding every year for 5 years. We went as far as we could with that because the message we were hearing from the working group was it is very hard to recruit when there's only certainty, say 1 year ahead. And shared, we're providing that 5-year certainty to facilitate the kind of solid recruitment and to facilitate workplace planning within local authorities. So what will these teams be looking to achieve? So moving on to the outputs, I suppose in the broad strokes. Number one is just improved delivery timelines and budget management, as well as that developing maybe more feasible applications that aren't quite as prone to project optimism, that are more informed by continuous experience. And then something that's very important to our department is a single point of contact for each local authority for DRCD. So someone we can develop a working relationship with in the long term, who has a good overview and who's in the loop on the major projects in their county. It could provide a bit of continuity in communications. So someone we can just pick up the phone to and again, just check in on the major projects and get that single version of the truth on how things are progressing. Another thing, and this was particularly important to Minister Humphreys, was the coordination of the various resources that we're funding within local authorities. So not just the staff funded under this Capital Delivery Teams initiative, but the town regeneration officers, broadband officers and so on that Paul mentioned above, just to get them meeting on a monthly basis to bring a bit of joined up thinking to rural development in the round and to make sure that information and best practice isn't falling between stools. So just a couple of other things that are important to us in terms of providing this funding for the rural capital delivery staff. Number one is that they should be working exclusively on DRCD funded projects. The second one is additionality. And what I mean by that is we're looking for an increase in the number of people working on our projects. So this funding isn't there to replace existing staff, it's there to augment existing staff and expand the capacity that each local authority has to deliver. And we also have a strong preference where there are maybe new roles that might arise as a result of this funding. We have a strong preference that there should be a competitive process of some sort, an open competition, just to ensure that we're giving a chance to get the best people for the job. And last thing, we have spoken to the Department of Housing and let them know that this is coming down the road. So they're ready to provide sanctioning once they get the word from us. We hope this will speed things up and put local authorities in a position where they're able to start recruiting as soon as possible. So look, this is a big commitment for our department. This is 7.3 million per year for the next 5 years out of the capital budget. And because of that, we really want to make sure that we're getting the most out of it, but we also want to make sure that it's doing what it's supposed to be doing. So we're putting a number of government and coordination structures in place to oversee it and to again get that joined up thinking going between counties as well as within counties. So I'm just going to hand over to Emma now to talk about those governance and coordination mechanisms.
Thanks, Elaine. Just want to make sure that everyone can hear me.
I can.
Perfect.
I'll take them as good.
Yeah. So as Elaine mentioned, I'll be chatting about coordination, oversight, and then governance. So really in the interest of coordination and oversight, we'll be establishing the following structures, which you can see on the screen. It's not going to be onerous in terms of time, but we think it's really important to ensure collaboration and to make sure there are open channels for communication, both internally and externally. So in the center of the diagram, you can see the advisory group. So this is their, will be put in place to support the development of the CDT initiative and to examine progress on an ongoing basis. And the idea is that this would be comprised of staff from our team, from the department, and then also representatives from local authorities. And they'll meet quarterly. And then on the FA side, as Paul and Elaine touched on, we want to ensure a joined approach to project identification and delivery. An application delivery can be siloed. So this monthly meeting of kind of all the DRCD funded roles such as CIT leads, broadband officers, the TROs, etc., is really to help overcome that. And then on our side, we'll be establishing a capital delivery coordination group. And this is really so that we'll be having regular meetings, bringing together the units dealing with capital schemes to discuss key issues. And we'll also be focused on increased coordination. And both the capital delivery coordination group and the rural development coordination groups will feed back to the advisory group, as you can see in the diagram.
And shared.
And then on a larger scale, we'll be establishing a national network. So this is a forum for direct local authority and DRCD engagement on matters related to the capital investment schemes, but it'll have a slightly wider membership in that it'll be all the CDT staff as well. And really it's going to be an opportunity for knowledge exchange and cooperation among local authorities with regards to management of DRCD funded capital projects. And the national network will only meet twice a year, once online and one in-person conference that'll be organised by us in DRCD.
And shared.
Then, in case there are kind of other issues arising, we're allowing for the potential to establish thematic subgroups as required. So
And shared.
they can be formed if we feel they're needed to investigate or progress relevant thematic issues. So, for example, there were a couple of points raised during meetings with the RCCH working group that may require further discussion, such as things relating to asset maintenance costs or issues around peri-urban areas. So it'll just be, we're kind of allowing for the possibility of a space to discuss other issues of relevance to local authorities, and they'll feed back to the national network.
And shared.
And just to note, kind of all the information that I've been giving about these groups will be on the slides. So
And shared.
now I'll move on to just chatting a bit about governance. And
shared.
the capital delivery teams represent significant investment from the department, so we'll be monitoring their progress in the following ways. So the first is through annual reports from the local authorities, and that'll really be a reflection on progress throughout the year and looking at what was achieved, what was spent, those sorts of things. Then the second thing we'll be doing is looking at metrics. So one of the biggest issues is whether projects are being delivered on time and on budget. And metrics in particular are going to be a really important means of assessing the efficacy of the capital delivery teams as well as value for money considerations. So we're building infrastructure to be able to measure a variety of things, such as the percentage of projects delayed, the duration of delays, the percentage of projects with cost overruns, the size of those cost overruns, and things like that. But just to note, this work is still ongoing, and we're going to be discussing any potential metrics in collaboration with the advisory group.
And shared.
And really, the metrics are not about comparing local authorities to each other, but looking at year-on-year improvements within an LA. So, for example, as you can see on the slide, looking at maybe changes in delays or cost overruns over time for a particular local authority.
And shared.
And then finally, there'll be a midterm review. So this is going to occur 2 years into the initiative. And it's a chance to look back on the programme once we have a bit more data and a bit more knowledge. And, you know, all of the teams should be in place by then. You'll have had a sense of how they're working, what they're achieving. And so this is an opportunity to sense check and to see what's working well, where there are challenges, and where there might be opportunities to change things if needed, such as to rejig the structure if you feel that it could be working a bit better for you. So that's really it on the governance side of things. So I'll hand back to Elaine just to talk about next step.
Thanks, Emma. So just very quickly to talk about the next steps. And shared. As I mentioned, we're going to be inviting proposals from each local authority for what they would like to do with this funding that we're making available. So the next step really is for local authorities to consider their own staffing needs, who they might need to put in place and what areas they might need to fill to improve how they're delivering our projects. And shared. To develop that into a written proposal, then there's a template in the funding agreement document that issued with the invitation to this meeting that just covers all the bases that we would like to see covered. So I'll issue a funding letter with a few more details on the next steps and on the process later today, possibly later today or tomorrow, depending on how things go. And shared. That'll give the full details then on how to apply for the funding. So I'll hand back to Paul.
Thanks very much, Elaine and Emma. Look, there's a lot to digest there, and we're going to make these slides available for everybody anyhow. But any questions, keep them coming in the chat, and I will pause after Sean's piece, so in case anybody has anything that they want to bring up at that point. Sean McKeown from Kilkenny Director of Service, Kilkenny County Council, are you ready to go?
Unshared.
Got the thumbs up.
Perfect, Paul, yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Thanks, Paul. And I've just got a couple of slides here, so we'll try and get those up on the screen. Paul said, Sean McKeown here, Director of Services in Kilkenny County Council, and I'm going to provide a brief overview of our experience here in Kilkenny and how we propose to deploy the additional staff resources that we've been hearing about here this morning to be funded by DRCD. The arrangements we've put in place will suit our situation here in Kilkenny. I'm not trying to suggest that it's the only or even the best arrangement. As Elaine said earlier on, this is not one size fits all, but I'm happy to share with you how we think our approach will help us maximise the funding opportunities from DRCD. So just a little bit of background, first of all, as has been outlined this morning, there's been a significant increase in DRCD capital funding streams over the last number of years and almost trebling since 2017. There's been a relatively poor annual drawdown of funding, and this has been a major issue and source of concern for DRCD. In the case of Kilkenny, we heretofore have had a number of sections involved in delivering DRCD programmes. So we've had our community section, our economic development unit, area offices and area engineers, our facilities team. Basically, whoever had a bit of spare capacity did the job. And there was no dedicated team in place. And this was fine when the volume of applications was limited. But as the DRCD funding has increased, so too has the opportunities, the number of applications and the associated workload. Staff who had been working part-time on projects when they're faced with many other demands tend to deflect attention onto those demands. So as the funding opportunities expanded and the staff involved have found it increasingly difficult to reach out and maximise the opportunities that are available. There's been delays then in commencement of projects and drawdown of funding and so on. Lack of technical skills in particular. I'm talking about design skills here, procurement, survey work, project and contract management, all of that good stuff has been lacking in recent times. So in a nutshell, we've found in Kilkenny that the approach we had up to now is no longer fit for purpose. And we certainly welcomed the CCMA review that was undertaken last year, headed up by the former Chief Executive here at Kilkenny, Colette Byrne. And that essentially concluded that there was a need for a dedicated resource. That review in turn led to the CCMA DRCD working group that Paul has referred to there. I was a member of that working group, and that has led to the development of the proposal that we've been hearing about this morning for the provision of the additional resource. And that's the kind of background and context. So the proposed structure that we'll be submitting here in Kilkenny, there's just a little organisational chart there on your screen, and I'll kind of explain that to you. So the capital delivery team that we propose to establish will be set up within my directorate, and under my directorate, I've got planning, economic development, regeneration, environment, climate action, and now capital delivery. The capital delivery team will have a total of 11 staff, including and headed up by a senior engineer. And we will be involved in maximising funding of capital projects under a wide range of government-funded programmes, not just DRCD programmes, but also Fáilte Ireland capital programmes, the TII Greenways programmes. We have a relationship here in Kilkenny as well with our local leader program. So the staff will be working in the capital delivery team with some communities in progressing some of those projects as well, because we found that under those other funding programs, the same issues are arising as we've been discussing here this morning under the DRCD program. So just to explain the organisational chart there in the different colours. So the orange boxes relate to staff that are already in situ and have been assigned from other sections of the organisation to our new capital delivery team. The blue boxes then are the staff to be recruited and to be exclusively involved in delivering of the DRCD programs. That's the 3 staff here, and I'll explain their roles in a moment. And then the green boxes are staff to be recruited to deliver other capital projects. Some of these will be funded under, like we have 2 members of staff. They're a senior executive engineer and an executive engineer that will be funded by TII on our Greenway projects. And then we have other programs that will partially fund these staff, and the balance of funding then will be provided here from the organisation. So that's the total 11 staff. So what will the 3 DRCD funded staff be doing then? Just to summarise, then we'll have a grade 7, a senior executive engineer and an executive technician. That's the 3 staff that we see that are needed within the capital delivery team to maximise the DRCD funded programmes here in Kilkenny. So the grade 7 will oversee the administration of the various DRCD schemes. They will deal with calls for proposals, develop the grant applications, deal with the grant drawdown, the aftercare, the auditing and all of that good stuff. So that's the grade 7, and possibly will be the main point of contact as well for the department that has been mentioned there by Elaine. The senior executive engineer then will oversee all technical aspects of the projects, deal with cost estimates and procurement, contract management, dealing with contractors and all of that type of stuff. And the executive technician then will oversee the surveys, prepare planning documentation, contract supervision, and so on. So you can see we have 2 technical people, and grade 7 then will deal with all of the heavy lifting involved in the grant applications and all of the dealings in terms of grant drawdown and all of that with the department. So that kind of gives you a summary. And just to maybe give you an idea of the scale of projects in Kilkenny, we currently have 73 projects of various sizes with a total investment of just under 67 million that sit under our capital delivery team at the moment. They're all at various stages of development. Some have received approval of funding, others are in the pipeline and applications have been made. Some have planning in place where appropriate, others still require planning. So they're all at different stages of development. And these projects range from very small Measure 1 ORIS type projects, which, 30,000 euro, up to some very large scale projects that are funded by Fáilte and TII. So there's a full spectrum of projects, but they all require a dedicated team to deliver them. And we see this structure as maximising delivery and maximising the opportunities that are there. And these 3 staff here will be exclusively involved in the DRCD funded programme. So hopefully that organisational chart is clear there. So just moving on then to the operation and governance. So we see our community section will continue to animate projects as usual, and they'll have more time now to devote to this since they won't be involved in the project delivery. So they'll continue to engage with local communities and help them to identify projects under the DRCD funded programmes. Project ideas then that are identified under the various programmes will be brought forward to the capital delivery team for consideration and development. Senior engineer in the capital delivery team will then present these project ideas to a capital delivery steering group that we're going to establish here within the council. And that capital delivery steering group will be chaired by our chief executive, and it'll consist of the full management team, the senior engineer in the capital delivery team, the town regeneration officer, the senior executive officer in the community section, and our senior planner. So has been mentioned there, the Minister is seeking this level of discussion at each local authority level, where the TRO and your capital delivery team and your community section will come together. So that aligns with that thinking. The steering group will consider the project ideas and then give the go-ahead for the project ideas to proceed to the next stage of development. And that will involve the capital delivery team then engaging with the local community as appropriate, undertaking the various survey work that needs to be done, developing plans and drawings, the various surveys, progressing planning as necessary if that's needed, undertaking detailed feasibility if that's required under various funding programs, the business case that needs to be made for application for funding, and so on. The capital delivery team does all of that. And if and when funding is approved, the capital delivery team then will prepare a detailed project program for each project approved to ensure the efficient project delivery. That will include the overall budget, the various funding sources, the grant aid that's to be provided, the balance of finance to be provided by the council, and so on, project lead for each project, the various milestones that have to be achieved, whether planning is required or not, the various timelines for project delivery then, mitigation of project risks, and an idea then of the project drawdown in each year. And that's obviously crucial to DRCD in their planning of funding on an annual basis. The senior engineer will present a project update then to the steering group on a monthly basis. We'll start off monthly, and we'll see then as we go whether or not we move to bi-monthly or whatever. But certainly initially, because of the scale of the projects here in Kilkenny and the various stages that we're at, we certainly intend to set up monthly meetings initially. And the senior engineer then will raise any issues to be addressed. And because we have all the relevant decision makers that I've mentioned earlier there around the table, we would certainly hope that anything that's within the council's gift then to resolve will certainly be resolved in a timely manner, and any obstacles that present can be overcome at the steering group level. The senior engineer then will also arrange for more timely progress reports to DRCD, which is another important outcome of this whole process from the department's perspective. So just moving on then, finally to the agreed objectives that will be important in all of this process. So first and foremost, from our perspective here in the council, it's all about maximising the funding opportunities with a dedicated team that will be able to focus their efforts and energies on doing just that. Hopefully then it'll result in higher volume and quality of applications, so a better and stronger pipeline of projects coming forward, and hopefully no missed opportunities. We will enhance our capacity to deliver projects with the specialist team and staff with the requisite skill sets, and the team then will develop expertise over time. It will ultimately result in more sustainable projects and reduce project risks, which will be a win-win for the council and the department. And very importantly for both ourselves and the department, it will mean more streamlined delivery and timely drawdown of funding. And the DRCD funded staff then in the capital delivery team will work exclusively, as I said earlier, on DRCD funded programs, and in particular the four big ones there that I've mentioned: the ORIS, the RRDF, Town and Village Renewal, and the Community Recognition Fund. So that's a quick overview of our approach here in Kilkenny. Again, I reiterate that our approach may not be appropriate for every local authority, but I think the resource proposed and the proposal developed by the department allows for flexibility and for each local authority to put forward and adapt the approach that they need to suit their own circumstances. So it's a very welcome development. We're delighted with the proposal and the funding and the resources that are being brought forward by the department. So it's a very welcome development. So listen, thanks for your attention, and I'm happy to answer any questions. Thanks. Back to you, Paul.
Sean, thanks so much for that. I can't imagine a more useful input than that, really. Just so practical. And just to say that the department would be absolutely supportive of that approach in general. It makes sense. Great to see the diagram there representing how it's going to work there. So, look, thanks again. I'm still reading, by the way, from the breadth of your remit. That sounds like one busy directorate, but it just shows you. If you want something, don't ask a busy person. Isn't that what they say? So, look, thanks a million for that. Really, really solid input. I'm going to pause just for a minute. There is a hands up function on this. I'm not sure if I can see all the hands by me, Elaine and McKeown. But if anybody wants to ask questions at this point, and I see a few coming in over the chat. So, Michael, I think
Those other.
I'm really sorry, muted myself. Alwyn, comes just a question for Sean there. How do you get design work completed?
Those other. Yeah, well, some of it, depending on the complexity and scale of it, can be done in-house. But we have a framework then of consultants that we draw upon as needed. You know, some of the RRDF projects, for example, are just too big for our own in-house team to be involved in. So we would have a framework of pre-qualified contractors then that we could do a mini tender on to try and get a speedy turnaround on the design. But oftentimes, you know, for those larger scale projects, we do need to call on the outside expertise. But for the smaller projects, you know, we're able to do that in-house. Hopefully that answers that question.
Thanks, Sean. And just one from Michael Quinn there. Where does the Town Centre First Officer sit in the Kilkenny structure?
Yeah, well, they sit under me, and that's a small team of 5. And they have the town centre first remit that we're all familiar with, but also in this local authority, they're responsible for the URDF call 3, which is all around the derelict sites and turning them around in the city here in the first instance. But we also have a derelict sites initiative then around the county. We've set aside a provision in our capital budget to tackle some of those in the smaller towns and villages. So the TRO is responsible for that role as well. But because they sit under my directorate, there's good liaison then in collaboration with the other skill sets that we need and close cooperation then with the capital delivery team.
Okay, thanks, Sean. And just to acknowledge the comment from Colleen there as well. Thanks, Colleen. Look, I think we might push on. We'll leave another little gap at the end for questions and answers. But just to reiterate, and I'll be giving you out the email address again. We're here all the time to take queries. And so maybe when people receive the slides, we might generate another few questions. And Sean, I take it you're happy enough for those your own slides to be shared with this group as well. I think that would be very useful. Okay, thanks.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, so look, and just to say one quick thing that occurs to me before we move on. We're talking about recruiting. A lot of people as head of HR of the department, I know what the challenge of recruitment is. This is the next big hurdle, and we might just touch on that at the end as well. And just to acknowledge that at this point, it's the org charts are one thing, with populating them with the right personnel is quite another challenge. So look, we do acknowledge that. So just going to move on a little, and. As we're talking about all these new structures, we're also conscious that we're in the middle of a very busy year, and the likelihood is these teams won't be in place for some time, and we've got a lot of projects and we've got a lot of schemes and programs rather to push out there. So Fintan O'Brien, who is the Assistant Secretary here on the Rural side, is just going to talk to us for a few minutes about those challenges. So are you ready to go there, Fintan?
Yep, good to go, Paul. Thanks. Okay, thanks, Paul, and good morning, everybody. Look, I won't keep you very long. I know everybody's busy. Look, obviously, this is an issue that we've been talking about a long time, this shared delivery challenge, and certainly in the ORCCH meeting with CCMA and meeting directors of service and that alone in Portlaoise in the last year, this is something that's come up quite regularly. Very conscious of it as a shared thing, and the fact that the demands on local authorities are growing quite rapidly. We had been looking at things around, spacing out our schemes, etc. But this is a much more kind of tangible resources, money, bums on seats type approach. So hopefully it will work for all parties involved. Really interested to hear what Sean was saying there about his approach. That looks really well thought out and very integrated. And to use his own language, it's about those practical win-wins for everybody. If that's where we're heading, then that's great. Obviously, that bit of flexibility to be able to do it across local authorities in different ways is important for us as well. But as Paul mentioned, this isn't something that happens overnight. It will take a while. We've seen that, for example, with the 10 regeneration officers. There's a process of getting people on board, getting everybody up to speed and getting that coordination. But certainly we can see that with the 10 regenerations officer. It was very evident across a lot of ORDF applications recently, that input of 10 regeneration officers and where that's coming on stream. But I suppose between now and the end of the year, while all this work is going on in terms of rolling out this model and the resources, we do need to kind of continue to focus on that shared delivery challenge and particularly drawdown by the end of the year. In keeping, I suppose, with some of the principles involved there, we're going to try and be a little bit more coordinated on our side of what we do towards the end of the year. So the first thing we'll be doing in the next week or so is that we will be going to local authorities for kind of status report updates. These will be across all the schemes at the one time, whereas before you were probably getting multiple requests from different sides of the department, different times, and that was probably a little bit frustrating. So we're going to try and get one across all our schemes snapshot at one time. There'll be nothing really new in that in terms of the information we're looking for, but I would just kind of stress we would greatly appreciate it if we get as realistic returns as possible on that exercise. Even if drawdown is going to be slightly lower now than you might have thought on a project a couple of months ago, it's important that we do kind of get that now. Even small changes add up to a lot for us across local authorities. The last couple of years, we've been down right to the wire in terms of drawdown, with your help in terms of getting all the money out and not leaving any capital money behind. But that accuracy of that information coming is central to that. What we'll do with that, I suppose, is we'll put it all together to get that snapshot of where we are, and that helps us in terms of planning towards the end of the year. In the second half of the year, again, we're going to try and be a bit more coordinated with how we engage with local authorities. For the last couple of years, we've had a series of meetings, not with all local authorities, but we've been rolling our way through them. So that'll be tonight. The rural teams in Ballina and Dublin that you'll probably work with. Myself and the Sec Gen will be meeting with certain local authorities as well. And obviously, you're all aware that the Minister is out on the road quite a lot. She'd like nothing more than going and visiting counties and showcasing all the projects that have been delivered by your team. So as part of that process, she'll be talking a lot about that delivery issue as well. The Sec Gen will also be writing to Chief Executive shortly, just to kind of set out the progress we've made to date, kind of reiterate the importance of kind of driving progress across these schemes and the importance of drawdown by the end of the year. And again, this issue of early engagement, problems will arise with these projects. That is unavoidable. Where we find out about them as early as possible, it just makes it easier to put in place fixes to try and make sure we're all on the same page. And again, that helps us get a full picture of how we need to manage our finances with the drawdown across all the schemes. So I suppose why that's important in the bigger picture is around putting down all the resources. So as we've said at the start, there has been a growth in the capital budget for these schemes, and that has led to a huge amount of important projects. But for us to be able to maintain and to grow that budget, we need to be able to show to deeper during the budgeting process that we are drawing down and we are utilising that money. It will be very difficult for us to be able to continue to have that argument with deeper if we're leaving money behind us at the end of the year. So in a nutshell, that's why this idea of getting clear information now where we're at and getting drawdown by the end of the year is so important. And what that eventually feeds through to is projects on the ground, which we can talk about structures and we can talk about money and we can talk about plans all we want, but at the end of the day, it's the projects that have been delivered by your teams across the communities, across the schemes, which is the end of it all. So I won't go for much longer. It's really just to say that's what we're trying to do between now and the end of the year in anticipation of these delivery teams coming on board. It is an iterative process. It is a process that we'll figure out as we go and we'll continue to talk to you. But if we could just reiterate that importance of that early information and engagement as we go through the end of the year just helps us to ensure that we're managing that drawdown, maximising funds and delivery of projects. So look, that's it for me. Happy to hand back to Paul now, but thanks a lot, folks.
Thanks very much, Fintan. And just to say, Sean had to pop away there as well. And before we got the chance to thank him formally, but he has said that if anyone has any queries, you follow up with him directly. And Fintan, I don't know if we have anyone specifically from the LIS side, but I might just kind of put you on the spot here. There's a question in relation to LIS. This will be a test of your specific knowledge, but are the same issues experienced in the delivery of local improvement schemes from the DRCD perspective? So I assume that means, we get delays and so on.
LAS has been, I suppose, in a way, it's kind of microcosm of what we're talking about here. For the last couple of years, there has been this situation where we have tried to get out early at the start of the year with LIS allocations to give local authorities that bit of certainty at the start, because obviously for local authorities to get that work done, there's a bit of planning involved, just getting contractors in place. And then as we've gone through the year, we've got that feedback from local authorities in relation to drawdown. We've started to, in the last 2 years, identify that there was going to be areas where drawdown wasn't going to be fully utilised. And the Minister's decision in the first 2 years I've been here was to, I suppose, prioritise the LIS with those savings in terms of delivery on the ground. So from the local authorities' point of view, that probably has been a little bit frustrating in that we've gone out in the summer with all of a sudden, here's another allocation of money. We were trying to get that a bit more coordinated this year. And we were kind of held up with discussions with deeper in relation to money and NDP reviews. But usually this year we've gone out with a 2-year allocation to try and give that kind of certainty across. In terms of the actual delivery issues with LIS, it hasn't been a particularly problematic one for us in terms of drawdown and delivery. There have been some counties where we've had to discuss not full drawdown, but it seems to be one that those managed across the board and generally has been pretty effective at drawing down money. It is a challenging scheme, but at the same time, it's in this unusual situation, I think, where there's a lot of talk about backlogs on roads and more funding for it. It's not simply a funding issue with LAS in terms of delivery. If you quadruple the money for LAS in the next 5 years, that's not to say that you'd have all the contractors be able to deliver from the on the ground anyway. So it's a bit of an unusual one. We have been trying to be a bit clearer earlier here as to how we approach that in terms of feedback we have to the local authorities, but it's not one that we're seeing massive drawdown problems across the board. I'm sure if that answers the question, but I'll hand back to you now, Paul. Thanks.
All right, thanks very much, Fintan. And there's
Paul, can I just say there's been Liam Ward has had a hand up for a little while now.
Oh, sorry.
He's waiting patiently, so it might be an opportunity for Liam to ask a question.
Yeah, go ahead, Liam. Sorry.
Oh, thanks very much, Paul, and thanks, Elaine. And just to say, I suppose this proposal or funding arrangement is very much welcomed. I suppose I have one or two queries. One in relation to, and it's just your last question, Paul, to Fintan there, around the LIS being included as part of this funding agreement. I'm not sure if it's the same in all local authorities, but in Donegal context, the LIS funding is very much handled through our roads division and our area teams, and that stream is somewhat like that funding is dealt with completely different from the community side of our workings. And I just wondered about that being included as part of this funding agreement. The department may have very good reason for doing that, but I just wonder about that. The second, I suppose the second thing, it was a point that Elaine made during her presentation, which was in relation to the overheads, and that, that the 260k would replace some of the overheads, but not in all cases. But if you take the LAS, for example, there is a standing arrangement, I think it's 10% that the local authorities can use towards funding of staff and overheads. And is it envisaged that this arrangement now would replace that funding stream to local authorities? And also in the context of the Community Recognition Fund, which clearly does fall under this funding agreement, where there was an allowance for local authorities, in our case, for example, given the scale of the monies we received, which we're very grateful for, we could use up to €100,000 of our funding towards staffing. And does this allocation now replace that monies? I suppose is some of the queries I have. And thanks again. But certainly welcome the proposal.
Thanks very much, Liam. Elaine, I might let you go through some of those specifics.
Sure. Thanks for the questions, Liam. So on the LIS, you're right, and we're aware that that's usually managed by the roads section of any given local authority. So to be honest, we don't see it as the core really of the schemes that we're referring to. We're thinking mainly of RDF, TVRS, ORIS, CLOR, the Community Centre Investment Fund, and then CRF. If LIS is a particular problem in a given local authority, then, sure, that could be put in the proposal as a gap that needs to be filled. But because it's generally separate and is generally managed by the road section, we would see it as not core to this proposal. But as I said, we're not being too prescriptive. So if there is any massive problem in a given local authority, we can certainly take a look at that. And on the overheads question and the scheme you referred to, I might be incorrect. Were you referring to the extra funding for LCDC staffing, or was it something else?
No, it was directly the Community Recognition Fund.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
We received an allocation in excess of 3 million over 3 million each year for 2 years. The last two announcements, which I say was very much welcomed in the county. A lot of communities have got very good outcomes from that. But there was a provision within that you could allocate 100,000 of your allocation towards the staffing cost to support the implementation of the programme. And I'm just wondering, is the funding now being put out part of this funding agreement? Does that replace that, or is it in addition to it?
Okay, thanks for the clarification. And thanks for bringing that up. Actually, it is an important thing to clarify. So existing overheads that have already been put in place, that have already been agreed to, we're not going to go back in agreements that have already been made. The other thing is that we're aware the Community Recognition Fund was sort of came up at short notice for local authorities, and we know that there will be, there have been and there will be cases like that where maybe additional clerical resources are needed at short notice. So in cases like that, we're retaining the discretion to make a decision to leave those overheads in place. So it'll be, there may be differences in different scheme outlines depending on the needs of that particular scheme. So, and the CRF is one where we know that the short notice in both sort of tranches of the CRF had their own particular challenges, let's say. So no, those overheads will stay in place. But it's more the sort of ongoing, more predictable schemes that we know are running for years and years, where again it's all about continuity. So that's more the area where we're looking at phasing out those overheads.
No, very much welcome that. Thanks very much, Elaine. And apologies, Paul, but I have to leave the meeting now as well. So thank you.
Thanks, Liam. And thanks, Liam, for covering that off. Listen, I was going to wait to the end to introduce Ken Jordan, our corporate executive, who has ultimate oversight of this. But there's a question in from Mark in Roscommon County Council that I think Ken would like to go at answering. So I'm going to put him on the spot there. So are you there, Ken?
Thanks, Paul. Yeah, no, I am, and I actually think myself and Mark worked about 15 years ago on the National Cycle Network. I'm not sure if it's one and the same in the regional roads office at the time. I think it was, but yeah, Mark, I think when I read this question coming through, it kind of struck me of a lot of the conversations we had in the group. And look, the paper that came from the CCMA very much outlined this approach of having a funding amount, a fixed funding amount for all authorities. The group we had, and we had really good discussions. We went through this on the basis of, look, obviously all counties aren't the same size. Some counties deliver much more projects, but we ultimately rested on that idea of having a fixed amount for all local authorities. And look, I know Colleen is on the call as well, and maybe he might have a word on this, but I think we've agreed that is the case, that the 270 for each authority is the amount. and works best, and is what was proposed. But when you talk about the other overheads, like what we've left in the agreement is very much project specific. If somebody is putting in a huge RRDF project, we're not saying that there's no other costs embedded in there. This is very much about providing every local authority with the capacity to develop good projects, bring them through. But these big projects, we're not saying there's no overhead on them. What we're saying is that we need to go through each of them individually and say, look, do you actually need the overhead? Like what I would say, we are providing the guts of 10% of our rural regeneration fund towards this. It's a big amount of money. Myself and Fintan would have been involved with the discussions with the minister on this. I don't think we could have pushed it any further. And I just hope it is enough to achieve what we want to achieve. And I think, look, based on the meetings we've had, it should be. But I think the other thing is, and I'll throw this one back to Paul now, but I think, look, if there are very specific issues we're not covering, I think maybe a bit of back and forth individually is worth it. But I would say, look, on the basis of Sean's presentation, we kicked an awful lot of discussions through the group, and I think we landed on something that should work for most people. So look, I'm not addressing all 7 questions there, Mark, but we might come back on them directly. But I maybe just on the approach, and what probably is a one size fits all approach was agreed. Paul, the reason I did want to come in as well, just I only started this job back in October, and was handed that paper sometime in November, and really just to say, I think the key to the progress we've made over really 6 months, the relationships between ourselves and the local authority system, which has been absolutely excellent. I think that reflects the fact that this is really a win-win. Like, we are going to see better projects coming forward. We're going to see better delivery. And I think, look, those relationships have just been absolutely critical. Paul mentioned John Mulholland at the start. I know Colleen, O'Reilly and Lar Power were involved as well. And again, look, down the group we had. But really, just to say, I think this is all about those relationships. And look, I know Paul has sent out the offer there. The door is always open to talk to us. So I think that'll just be a huge part of making sure this is a success. So in one way, getting this far is probably the easy bit. Paul mentioned the challenges of recruitment, and then look, the challenges on our side of making sure we can measure the impact of these teams is big as well. But look, we've a busy few months ahead. But looking forward to kind of say this all come to fruition. Paul, I might hand back to you. Mark, I hope I covered some of what you asked there, but we can come back on the specifics again directly.
Ken, thanks very much. And Mark has confirmed over the chat that it was indeed the same Mark from 40 years ago, whenever you worked together on whatever. Okay, so that's good. Listen, and I think what you said might have covered off a little bit of Edmund Ryan's concerns there, as he's expressed them on the chat as well, in relation to, look, this stuff is complex, to pull projects through efficiently and quickly, through all of the stages of, capital works framework thing and requirements and so on, is expensive. And although he has welcomed the funding, he's questioning whether or not it's enough. And listen, absolutely, this will be kept under review. But as Ken has kind of covered off in his answer, we got to this point, I suppose, through a lot of discussion with yourselves, and this is where we've landed. So, and it's like everything else, we have to start somewhere, and this is where we're at. So, look, I don't know if there's any other hands up. I can't see. I'll just repeat that the email address is capital delivery teams at drcd.gov.ie for all queries. And just to close off as well, thanks to everybody for coming in this morning and your attention. Lots of familiar faces around the place, so not unlike Ken, I'm haunting some of you for years in very sort of different guises. So it's great to see. It's great to see you all today. This is another chance to improve the collaboration between ourselves and the local authorities. And I did mention the challenges of recruitment. Ken touched on it as well, but that's going to be something that we're going to face into over the coming months. Minister Humphreys, just to say, is just fully behind this initiative. She really is, and very kind of enthusiastic about it, as we are. And to that end, we do plan to hold a bit of an event in the autumn, where the Minister would probably like to meet all of the teams and maybe have a little bit of a formal launch, kind of formalise it in that way. So, there's going to be a push on to get these people recruited across the system, and look, that's not going to be easy, but whatever we can do to support you in that, we will. So just to say thanks again to Sean for his presentation earlier. I found it really kind of helpful. Thanks Thanks to Ken and Fitler for coming along today as well, and all the DRCD staff who turned up this morning as well. Thanks for showing the interest. And thanks to all you guys in the local authorities. We'll be talking to you all, I would hope. And I just see that Emma has put up the email address in the chat there if people want to copy and paste it. So listen, be chatting to you all soon. Thanks a million for coming this morning. I'll leave it at that, if that's okay.